So let the record show that here on July 1st, we're talking about the 2022 IndyCar season. I guess it's silly season already because there has been a ton of talk about the 2022 season already. In fact, three really significant articles I want to talk about. All of the links to those articles will be in the description. I'm just going to pull just a couple of key notes from them and talk about them because, trust me, there are some key things happening behind the scenes right now in IndyCar racing. And if you've clicked on this video, you've probably already clicked for the reason I'm going to talk about right now, which is Jimmie Johnson is apparently very, very serious about doing the Indianapolis 500 next year. Nate Ryan, NBCSports.com, had this to say today, or at least had this quote from Jimmie Johnson. We're trying to set up a test for me to run a big oval so that I could then go to the Brickyard for the fall tire test that typically happens and go through my rookie orientation, Johnson told NBC Sports. And we're trying to find either Texas or Homestead. I need to run one of those two first before I can go to the ROP at the Brickyard in the fall. So, 82 times Jimmie Johnson won in NASCAR Cup competition on an oval track. And thanks to NASCAR Man for this stat, only one of those was on a road course. He's only been running road courses his IndyCar career, but it certainly does appear, okay, it doesn't just appear. Like, I really need to beat this into people's heads. This is a tacit admission that Jimmie Johnson's going to do the Indy 500 next year. We need to be very clear about that. There's no ifs, ands, or, well, I guess there are some ifs, but the language is very much, there's a plan. Got to go to Homestead or Texas. I hope it's Homestead because I don't know how Jimmie's going to deal with the PJ1 at Texas. But you do your first oval test, you come to Indianapolis, do the rookie orientation similar to what Scott McLaughlin did this year or last year, at the end of last year after St. Pete. And then you come back in May and you're ready to go for the 106th running of the Indianapolis 500. At this point, again, something could go wrong in one of the tests and Jimmie could just say, okay, this isn't for me. No doubt about that. And that's why he wants to do this. That's why he wants to test. But the fact that we went from, and this is amazing to me because we went from at the beginning of 2020, right? It was Jimmie Johnson. He's like, yeah, I'd kind of like to do IndyCar. And then it turned into, okay, well, you're going to get a test with Arrow McLaren SP. Then the world fell off a cliff. And then in the middle of the summer, it was like, okay, Jimmie, well, Arrow McLaren SP doesn't have any time for you right now. How about Chip Ganassi racing? And it was like, okay. And then he had a positive COVID test, and then it was delayed for a little bit, and then he finally got to run. Then he was like, oh, yeah, this is awesome. I'm going to do the road courses. And then people started asking him immediately about the ovals, and he's like, no, I'm not going to do the ovals. Then he started to change his tune the more he ran Indy cars, and it was like, well, maybe I'll do a short oval here or there. Maybe I'll do Gateway. And we've gotten this far down the line where now Jimmie's like, yeah, I'm going to do my rookie orientation. So this is very exciting. And it's amazing because just yesterday, I pointed at, ironically, I don't have the Jimmie Johnson car out today, but I pointed to the Jimmie Johnson car when we were talking about Chip Ganassi getting paid for his NASCAR operation. I was like, this opens up the possibility to do things such as run Jimmie Johnson at the Indianapolis 500. Because you still have, unless they're going to buy Tony Kanaan out of his contract, Tony Kanaan is still contracted to race the oval tracks for Chip Ganassi Racing next year. So that could potentially be a 5-car team from Chip Ganassi Racing. But again, now that the NASCAR organization has been sold, maybe you have some funds opened up that you can do this sort of thing. And you got to think that, and this is weird because I kind of figured when Jimmie Johnson said he was going to be on the NBC Sports broadcast, the Indianapolis 500, and that he had never been to the Indianapolis 500, right off the bat, I'm like, okay, this guy's going to catch the bug. There's no way he's not going to catch the bug because he always talks about how he was an IndyCar fan growing up. He loved the Indianapolis 500. He loved guys like Rick Mears, but he'd never been to the race on race day. And it's like, okay, yeah, he's going to get it. And it just so happened that all 4 of the Chip Ganassi racing cars were in the Fast 9. Dixon's on the pole. Palou is very nearly a winner in a Chip Ganassi racing car. You know, if the leapfrogging kind of worked out a different way, or if maybe Felix Rosenqvist had stayed out and drafted with Palou, they might have pulled away from Elio. Palou wins the race for Chip Ganassi. Jimmie Johnson, you don't become a 7-time NASCAR champion if you're not a competitive SOB. And you have to think Jimmie Johnson was sitting there going, yeah, I could have been in that second place car, and maybe I could have won. And that's what he's going to be thinking going into next year. And it's just, I can't believe this is really real, but it seems like it's really real. Jimmie Johnson, for all intents and purposes, is preparing to race in the Indianapolis 500 next year. Imagine saying that 10 years ago. You would have been laughed off the face of the earth because, and I think it states to, or it says something about the status of IndyCar racing and how, and I'm going to start beating this drum a little bit more. IndyCar racing, particularly the Indianapolis 500, seems like it's rising rapidly in profile. I think IndyCar, and a lot of this is the leadership of Roger Penske, let's be honest, has come out of the pandemic a lot stronger than I think we may have expected. I think Elio Castroneves winning his fourth was major. That's going to do great things. Because, again, Elio's a domestic star. Obviously, he's Brazilian, but he had his greatest successes here. And for him to have that success, it's raising the profile of the event. There hasn't been a 4-time winner actually participate in the Indianapolis 500 in my entire lifetime. That changes next year. Formula One has been talking about moving the date of moving the calendar around so that the Indianapolis 500 is a weekend off for Formula One. Well, what does that imply? It implies that F1 drivers, theoretically, potentially, if things work out and the schedules can be kind of manipulated between both Monaco and Indianapolis for pole day, you could see Formula One drivers in the Indianapolis 500 without having to skip an event. So then you look at possibilities like Lando Norris coming over here, or Daniel Ricciardo. We're going to talk about McLaren later in this video. But as of right now, it looks like we're going to get Romain Grosjean and Jimmie Johnson in the rookie class of 2022 for the Indianapolis 500. That's going to be significant. I'm so happy I'm doing what I'm doing because I get to be on the ground floor of that next year, providing you guys all with the coverage of that. So obviously we're going to continue with the Jimmie Johnson talk, the Jimmie Watch, I guess you could say, as we continue. But first, we need to move on to Andretti Autosport because there's some serious drama happening there as well. This article comes from Racer.com. Marshall Pruitt, again, link to that article will be in the description. This is the key quote. Comes from Michael Andretti, which says, I think there's going to be some change on the driver front, and the goal is to stay at 4 cars, Andretti told Racer. Obviously, we have 2 locked in right now, and there's 2 that are in question at the moment we're working on. Okay, so Michael Andretti, going to change it up at Andretti Autosport. Now, if you don't know, the 2 that are locked in right now with contracts are, hey, Alexander Rossi's one of them, but Colton Hurd is the other one. And I think a lot of people would probably say that these are the 2 drivers that have had the most success with Andretti Autosport, though certainly Rossi's been slacking a bit. And I've seen some internet talk that he's not particularly happy at Andretti Autosport. Apparently he's been a little bit catty on his podcast. But that'll be interesting to kind of see. Would someone go and buy out Rossi's contract? I don't know. But the 2 on the hot seat pretty clearly are Ryan Hunter-Reay and James Hinchcliffe. In fact, Ryan Hunter-Reay almost didn't run this season because DHL almost didn't come back. And I do have a contact on the James Hinchcliffe side of things, so I did, when this article came out, I reached out and was just like, okay, what's going on here? And the response I received was an interesting one on the Hinchcliffe side of things, which was, who's going to pay for it? And I interpreted that as Hinch has a budget. Who else has a budget that would kick Hinchcliffe out of the seat? I think a lot of people are going to be looking at Kyle Kirkwood, who is having a pretty decent season in Indy Lights right now. It's going to come down, it looks like, to him and David Malukas for the championship there. Assuming that Kirkwood wins the championship, which right now is not a guarantee with Malukas driving as well as he is. He's obviously an Andretti Autosport driver, and bringing $1 million+ into Andretti Autosport would certainly be more than potentially Ryan Hunter-Reay could come up with, especially if DHL leaves. So I would think that Kyle Kirkwood's definitely one who's in that discussion. I've seen a lot of people saying that both drivers, meaning both Hinchcliffe and Hunter-Reay, will be gone. My feeling would be that only one will go. So it'll either be Hinchcliffe will be out, potentially with Hinchcliffe's budget going with him. We'll have to see how that goes. Or Hunter-Reay will be out and Hinchcliffe will stay. I don't think they'll both go. And that's, again, just me. That's total speculation, by the way. Because I think a lot of people would point to like an Oliver Askew. And I agree. I would love to see Oliver Askew get another opportunity. In fact, a lot of talk right now has been that, wow, that guy really impressed when he was super sub for 2 weeks in a row on different teams and really did a great job at Road America. And he obviously has the Andretti Autosport connection as well. Does he have the budget? That's going to be the question. And I'm sure he's going to be working towards that in the offseason. As far as I had heard, Askew had actually gotten pretty close to an Indy 500 ride. He wasn't quite there. I think he was missing a little bit of budget, but he was close. So that would lead me to believe that it's not unrealistic that an Oliver Askew could come up with the budget to come back into IndyCar, especially this time having quite a bit of lead time between now and the season. And certainly the super sub duties have helped. The fact that he's still with Andretti Autosport, working with them on the IMSA side, has helped quite a bit. But then you also look at guys like maybe Devlin DeFrancesco, which is an interesting one because he's got the Steinbrenner Racing connection. The 29 car, which is driven currently by James Hinchcliffe, is the Steinbrenner Racing car. Devlin's got, as far as I know, quite a bit of budget. So theoretically, Devlin could move up and drive the 29 for George Steinbrenner, or one of the co-owners of that team, if they wanted to move up to Indy Light, or from Indy Lights to IndyCar, kind of similar to the way both of those guys moved up with Colton Herta in the past. But we'll have to see. Again, I think only one. I think only one will go between Hunter-Reay and Hinchcliffe, and I think it's going to come down to money. And so I think if DHL leaves, Hunter-Reay. Now the question will be, if DHL stays, what does Michael Andretti do? Because I think he's clearly considering a change. Do you throw both drivers out, even if they both have budgets, and try to get two different drivers in there? Where does the money come from? Like my contact at the Hinch camp said. That's the question, and we're going to have to see. Obviously, this is early days for this, but certainly I'll try to be on top of it as it develops. Final point, again from Racer, Marshall Pruitt, doing the grind. This is talking about a third potential Arrow McLaren SP car. There were some fairly vague quotes in here. I don't think this is super far along, or at least Sam Schmidt may be playing coy, which was essentially what Sam said was, due to the limited testing and everything else, we'd love to have a third car contributing fast and free, but it has to be fully funded. So, again, we've heard quite a bit about a third Sam Schmidt car for, 2-3 years at this point? Now, they came close in 2020 to pulling that off, at least on a most of the season schedule. Obviously, they didn't show up with a third car at the initial attempt at St. Petersburg, but as far as my understanding goes, they were going to try to get, I believe it was Jenson Button, Jimmie Johnson, and Fernando Alonso kind of to split that seat for most of the season. It obviously ended up not happening because the world fell on its face. But then you come to this year, and you had a much kind of a more solid Arrow McLaren SP effort for that third car this year, because of course they ran the Indy GP beforehand with Juan Pablo Montoya, and were rewarded with that third car having a third or a 10th place or a top 10 finish in the Indianapolis 500. So a lot of people have been pointing Kevin Magnussen as a guy, and Zach Brown himself has even kind of said, yeah, we'd want Kevin Magnussen. In fact, they would have talked to Kevin Magnussen if they'd known he was available before they talked to Felix Rosenqvist, which is kind of an interesting commentary that we found out last year. But my thought is, especially because a lot of people, rightly so, when you bring up Magnussen, point out that this guy signed to Peugeot in the World Endurance Championship for next year. So what's the conundrum there? My thought would be maybe we see a kind of a similar theory or a similar approach from Arrow McLaren SP that we saw them try to do in 2020, which is essentially turn I guess we'll call it the third car, the 86 car as it was this year, into an all-star kind of car. I would assume, because the World Endurance Championship season is not very long. It's pretty spread out throughout the year. Now, obviously, Peugeot is going to be doing a lot of testing, which is probably going to be the lion's share of what Kevin Magnussen's time is taken up by. But he has stated that he wants to run IndyCar. So maybe you run Kevin Magnussen at as many events as you can. Maybe try to get him in the Indianapolis 500, but then stick Juan Pablo Montoya in for the rest of the season, or maybe somebody else. Maybe do 4 cars at the Indianapolis 500 if you want to put Montoya and Magnussen in there as well. I think that one, again, it's kind of one of those things where you hear, oh, we're going to do a third car, and you hear it 3 or 4 years in a row, and you go, okay, yeah, right. Kind of like what was happening with Rahal for the longest time, but I would honestly put Rahal at a very high probability of having a third car next year, especially considering the amount Hy-V is starting to really activate, and quite honestly, how well Santino Ferrucci has taken to that team and how well he's been performing on a part-time schedule. I think you can definitely, I don't want to say act like I know that something's happening, but I would be very surprised if Meyershank Racing is only a 1-car team for the full season next year. Let's just put it that way. So it seems like IndyCar, the grid's going to be massive next year. And again, you look at not just the Indianapolis 500, which, again, there's a lot of moving parts, obviously, and it depends how many engines are actually available. But when you start thinking about, well, Ganassi could be at 5 cars, and Andretti could be at 5 cars, and Penske could be at 5 cars if you add in Pareto Autosport, and McLaren could have 3 or 4, and then you go, okay, yeah, maybe there will be 38 to 40 cars, and that's just amazing. And then for the rest of the season, you could have as many as 28 at most events. That's nuts. That's insane. That's fantastic news. It really is. It's great for the series, and it's going to be fun to continue to follow. So thank you guys so much for watching. This has been David Land on YouTube. Subscribe for more motorsport and IndyCar content. I'll be at SRX on Saturday night at Indianapolis Raceway Park, and then it's going to be an overnighter over to Mid-Ohio Sports Car Course for that race. We'll hopefully have a report out on both of those races on Monday. Hoping to get that filmed at Mid-Ohio before I have to come back home again to Indiana. So thank you guys so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.